Do you think you have to be smart to work in a business, to run a business, to start a business? Well, my question for you today, for you to think about, is this: what does smart mean? What does it mean to have intelligence? What does it mean to have the ability to learn? The word smart is misused constantly because people use it in different ways for different purposes. They use it for comparison. They use it as a descriptor of someone who has accomplished something. They use it as a descriptor of someone who could potentially accomplish something because their ability in terms of what they're able to accomplish in a given task or function seems to be very high based upon however they measure that. So honestly, I don't know the answer to this, but it's always perplexed me. Many people start out very slowly in life in terms of how they acquire knowledge. Some don't show a great deal of aptitude for their ability to acquire knowledge, but through diligent effort, ultimately become extremely knowledgeable. Now, we do know that the more you learn, the more you can learn because there's all these connections that you make. I mean, as a matter of fact, this entire series that I'm doing here is simply for the purpose of making people think about things. That is, if we can present a couple of topics, maybe compare them, give a little background to start the conversation in your mind. That is, if you battle with these potentially opposing views that we throw out when we're discussing these things, if we try to present an argument that may not be the exact representation of our current understanding, then hopefully that will make us smarter. But what are we really trying to do? Well, we could be trying to increase our acquired knowledge, but there's so much of that out there. The ability to acquire knowledge about something is everywhere. YouTube is full of it. The internet is full of it. ChatGPT and other AI answering LLM platforms will give you information at your fingertips. So the acquisition of knowledge, while it's something that we have to do, and we certainly have to marshal our resources appropriately so that when we need to acquire that information, we can. But then there's the ability to process the information, and the ability to process the information rests largely upon how deeply we're willing to think about something. And that normally means putting a lot of time and effort into the process of examining it. That is, comparing it to potentially alternative views of the same situation or scenario, or taking the elements of the situation that we believe are readily understood and questioning them. Go back even as far as the foundations and say, maybe my foundational understanding of this is wrong. And if we can do that, in my mind, we're becoming smarter. If there is a definition that encompasses that within the meaning of the word, we are in effect increasing our ability to process information, and we're increasing our ability to take information and create new things out of it. That is, if we question assumptions, it leads to novel or new outcomes. That is, things that we didn't think of before. So, in a way, intelligence or being smart is linked not only to the acquisition of knowledge, not only to the ability to process knowledge, but also the willingness, along with the ability, to question the things that we process and to question the way we process them. And we're all probably familiar, I would guess, with heuristics, the idea that our exposure, our past experiences, perhaps the way were raised or the people who influenced us in our lives or the situations or scenarios that we encountered at different points and times in our lives, those affect our thinking so deeply and how we reason through scenarios because we rely on these fundamental tenets. You may have heard the expression rule of thumb, if you will, or rules of thumb are just givens, things that we take for granted and we start our reasoning process from there. It's very rare that we reason through every scenario on a daily basis. We couldn't, as a matter of fact. So we take prior experience and we apply it to a given situation or scenario, and hopefully that gets us to the outcome that we desire in a given circumstance. But it begs the question, are we missing something if on the questions or the scenarios that potentially could change things, that could affect our lives or the lives of others more deeply, would we be better served if we were to think about those more deeply on a regular basis so that perhaps our opinion begins to change? Because we know that traumatic events, that is, we find out something or there's an accident or some dramatic change at a given point in time in our life, that causes emotional reactions that give rise to cognitive change, and we start to look at things differently and to consider different scenarios. So, but oftentimes we're not going to have that immediate change, that profound event that takes place that's going to affect our way of thinking, rather through continuous exposure. And that's the whole benefit of education versus training. The idea that continuous exposure to various points of view, to various scenarios, or to ways of thinking about things, the theory behind things, affects us as individuals because our continued exposure to it opens us up to it. Now, I would argue that people are rarely persuaded by someone else's way of thinking unless that individual holds a very strong position or a high degree of influence for whatever reason in their lives. So, if we are continually exposed to diverse inputs of information, opinions, ways of processing or thinking about things, what school should be, that is, the introduction of various points of view for our own consumption, digestion, and use in the cognitive process, then ultimately, yes, that is going to change us. And in a way, it makes us smarter. So, my personal definition of smart is simply the willingness and active pursuit of the ability to take differing views, differing ways of processing information, and the continuous consumption of information, and cycling that through to try to make sense of it, to come to a given conclusion, or to reach a desired outcome or goal that you perceive, for whatever reason, as being the most valuable or most beneficial to you or to the stakeholders or others whom you deem deserving of benefit in a given situation or scenario. So I rambled on a good bit about this, but hopefully this gets us all thinking a little bit about, one, using the word smart and what we mean by it, but also why we learn, why we study or acquire information, why we try to gain diverse exposure from others to ultimately make ourselves better and thus arrive at situations or scenarios that we deem are better for ourselves and society at large. So anyway, just food for thought. Of course, if you have opinions on this, jump in the comments down below or come to the forums at thebusinessprofessor.com. But in any event, I'd love to see you around there sometime in the future. So until then, take care.